What's up, nerds and nerdettes and wee little nerdlings all? Your buddy Big Johnny G from Two Gun Pixie Presents Legendary Gaming is feeling great today. Tricked you. No, I really am. I'm feeling great today. It's a little hot in New York City, very humid. I got my hair all wet and slicked back. That's the only reason it looks like that. But why am I feeling so awesome today? Because I realized something. The month of August has just started. And this is a very special month and a very special year for me. Because as far as I can tell, this is what I call a nerd birthday. A nerd birthday indeed. Now the reason I call it this is because as far as I can tell, best I can recollect, it was in the month of August. Way back in the old Wild West-like days of the 1970s here in New York City that I realized I was a nerd. Now, I'm not going to get into the semantics of whether somebody's born a nerd or not, whether that's what I believe or not, because that's not what I'm here to do. What I'm here to say is this is the marking, the period that when I knew I was a nerd. So I didn't realize I was a nerd at first, even though I loved things like watching Star Trek when I was a kid and the old Leonard Nimoy show In Search Of. Remember that one? That was a great show. And Project UFO, which was all about the Project Blue Book that was part of the United States Air Force to investigate UFOs. I didn't consider myself a nerd. I was just things that I liked. But it wasn't until August 1977 that I realized, and I felt good about it, that I was a nerd. Because you see, in 77, first came Star Wars. And wow, what do you say? What do you say to an 8-year-old kid who sees Star Wars for the first time and had never seen anything sci-fi like that before? Because it hadn't been really anything sci-fi like that before, on a big, huge screen in a completely otherwise pitch black movie theater. I mean, my eyes were the size of my freaking head. That was step one of two. Because you see, in August, a couple of months later, that's when a childhood buddy of mine, I still remember the scene. I still remember the scene after 40 years. Me, my buddies Dennis and Anthony and a few others were all hanging out in the street corner, because that's what kids did in 1977 in New York City, by ourselves on the streets. So we were hanging out trying to figure out what to do, and a bunch of the guys were thinking about going down to the park and playing some football, but I didn't want to. Sports was never anything that interested me. It kind of bored me. And then, while we're discussing what's going to happen, my other buddy Sean comes running out of his apartment. And he says, "Hey guys, I got a new game called Dungeons and Dragons. Anyone want to try it?" Dungeons and Dragons? What's that? Me, Dennis, and Anthony went up to Sean's place. And he introduced us to the basic set. And between Star Wars and that, my entire life was changed that summer. And that is when I knew that I was a nerd. I knew that what I was interested in, what made me happy, was comic books and sci-fi and fantasy and gaming. Oh, gaming. Because from Dungeons and Dragons, I've discovered the game Dungeon, the board game. You know it. It's out nowadays. It's been out for a while. There's a couple of different versions of it, though they're all pretty much the same. And then Hero Quest I discovered. Then Dark Tower. And wow, don't even get me started on the massive amounts of RPGs that I suddenly discovered and was starting to DM with all my friends, you know, like all the TSR stuff, like Top Secret and Boot Hill and Gamma World and Star Frontiers and Gangbusters. Oh, love that. Villains of Vigilantes and Marvel Superheroes, Man, Myth, and Magic. You know, I loved these games. Tunnels and Trolls. Couldn't get enough of them. None of my friends could. But that was all 40 years ago this month. 40 years ago, in August, is when I realized that I was happy with all these nerdy things. You know, and that's, hold on a second, hold on. Here we go. Now, that's saying a lot, because nowadays, People love being a nerd. Whoa, nice thunder. That's why we had so much humidity. But anyway, nowadays people love being a nerd. It's cool, it's hip, it's the thing to be. Let me tell you something. In the 1970s and 80s, it was a shit show to be a nerd. It was horrible on you. I mean, you loved it. That's why you were a nerd. I mean, you whatever it was that you were a nerd over, whether it was D&D or whether it was science or whether it was literature, you just loved it. And that in itself made you feel good. But nobody else really cared. They picked on you. You were a target. I mean, I was lucky because I was a whole head and shoulder taller than all my friends. Kids within a year or 2 years older than me, I was bigger than. And I had a little bit of a temper. I wasn't this big, fat wallflower of a kid. I had a temper. So when people picked on me, the bullies, usually, not always, I'm not perfect, but usually the bullies ended up getting their butts kicked. So, I mean, I had a little bit of a different experience being a nerd back in the 70s. But it didn't matter. I looked out for my other fellow nerds, looked out for myself. But we were having a good time. We were sitting on the porch of my building, playing Dungeons and Dragons when the weather was nice. Inside in the hallway when the weather wasn't bad. Because the floors, the tile floors of my building had that black and white checker pattern. You know what I mean? So we ended up using that as like a maze. That was our map. You know, we moved the figures one piece at a time. We loved it. I loved it. I still love being a nerd. Nowadays, it's easy to be a nerd. It's easy to walk around with a shirt like this and not get picked on. You know, but that doesn't change the fact that where I came from, the time period I came from, I was not cool. But anyway, 40 freaking years later, Big Johnny G is still here. Big Johnny G is still a nerd, and I am loving it. This is my nerd birthday. I might not know the exact date. I know it was this month, 1977, 40 years ago. And here I am. I'm loving it. So, not everyone knows their exact nerd birthday, and not everyone really has one, but this is mine. And I know it. And I'm so glad to be here. And I'm so glad all of you are getting to share it with me. Just a midday monologue on my lunch break out here before the obvious rain is going to come. And that was not in the forecast I looked at this morning. Didn't say there was a chance of rain until about 5 p.m. Looks like I misplayed that. Anyway, it's not raining now. And here I am with you, a fellow nerd. Nerds. Nerdettes. Feels good. Anyway, for Two Gun Pixie Presents Legendary Gaming, this is Big Johnny G on his nerd birthday, and I am loving it.